So now we shall see the third case, which is we have a 1-to-1 cardinality relationship. Okay. So for example, in the entity relationship diagram, we have a student and a card relation. I am using the same example. We have student and card. And for example, the cardinality is 1-to-1, which means that one card can be issued to maximum one student and one student can be issued with maximum one card. There is no possibility for a student to have more than one cards. There is no possibility for a card to be issued to more than one students. So whenever there is a 1-to-1 cardinality, so we'll have two relations, one for both entities, student ID for student and name is an attribute. And for example, we have card ID and RFID, for example. This is an attribute of the cards relation. So we have two options. We can add student ID on the card side and we can add card ID on the student side. Both options are valid. There is no harm in adding primary key in any of these. Okay. There's just a small suggestion. A little suggestion is that, for example, if you have one of these as an optional entity in this relationship, for example, that is the case. For example, one of these is optional. Okay. For example, card side is optional. So if there is a 1-to-1 cardinality, we are also analyzing the minimum cardinalities. Okay. So let's assume there is a 1-to-O minimum cardinality, which means that for a card, student is mandatory, while for a student, card is optional, which means that a student's instance can independently exist, but a card's instance cannot independently exist. It means student's instance independently exist means that we can have a student without a card, right? But card's instance cannot be added unless and until that card is issued to a student in this particular example. So card data would be added only when there is a value for foreign key. So good option is to add foreign key over here, because if card ID is added over here, that can be done. There is no harm in that. But for example, that is added here, we will be having null values. Okay, we will be having null values we can have null values in CID against the students who have not been issued with card, because that is possible. A student can exist without having a card. So if card ID is added over here as a foreign key, we can have null values. We can have. There is no harm in having null values, but better approach is to add the foreign key on the optional side so that there is no null value even in a foreign key. Now, this card's instance will only be added when that card is issued to a student as per this scenario. Okay, so for example, a card 1 with XSY RFID is issued to student 1. Now this data is added because the card instance has to be created as that has been issued to a student. So this is one case, that when you have a 1-to-O cardinality, and if you have an O-to-1 cardinality, you will add card ID over here if that is the case. Okay, for example, if student instance cannot exist independently, while the cards instance can exist independently, if that is the case, if for example this is O side and this is one side, then card ID would be added over here. Okay. The third case is if both sides are optional. It's your choice. You can add foreign key to the relation you like. And the fourth case is if both the sides are mandatory. Again, the choice is with you. You can add foreign key to any of these. So just a quick recap. Whenever we have a 1-to-1 cardinality relationship, we'll check the minimum cardinalities. If both the sides are optional or if both the sides are mandatory, then you can add foreign key to any of the relations. But for example, if one of the participating entities is mandatory and the other is optional, then recommended is to add the foreign key on the optional side so that we may not be wasting the space. Although there is no harm even in that. We can add the foreign key even on the mandatory side, but the only issue would be that there would be a possibility of having null values. Okay, so it's just like a warning in programming. It's not an error, but it's just like a warning. Okay, so this is how we map the binary relationships into the relational structure. So these are some of the examples. A customer and order relationship, where customer is one side while the order is a many side. So this is what we get. Okay, the primary key has been added on the many side. Okay, foreign key has been added on the many side, and this is referencing to the primary key of one side. So this is a many-to-many relationship. Example of a many-to-many relationship. We'll get three relations. Okay. So this is what we get. We have got three relations, one for both the participating entities and one for the relationship. And this relation has taken foreign keys from both the participating relations, and now they are acting as a composite primary key. It means that there is no chance of repetition of the group of values. Okay, and this date completed, this was an attribute of the relationship. So this attribute has been added into the third relation, which has been created to accommodate the relationship. So this is the rule. Okay, whenever there is an attribute of the relationship, that attribute would be added to the relation that holds the relationship. Which relation holds the relationship? The relation that has got the foreign key. That is the owner of relationship, because that holds the relationship. So the relation that has got the foreign key, because that is the owner of the relationship. So if ever we have an attribute of the relationship, that attribute would be added into that particular relation. And in this particular case, this certificate relation is holding the relationship, because this relation has both the foreign keys. So this attribute has been given to this particular relation. Now this is an example of a one-to-one cardinality relationship. A nurse can have maximum one care centers, and a care center can have maximum one nurses. So this is a one-to-one cardinality relationship. The minimum cardinalities are 1 to O. For a nurse, the minimum cardinality of care center is O, which means that a nurse instance can be independently created, while care center instance cannot be independently created, because for a care center, the minimum cardinality of nurse is mandatory. That is 1. So what was the rule? The rule was to add the foreign key on the optional side. So in this particular case, nurse ID would be added to care center. And if you see this date assigned, which is an attribute of relationship. Now to which relation this attribute should be added? To the care center. Why? Because we are adding foreign key over here. So foreign key basically holds the relationship. Okay. So this is what we get. Okay. Nurse ID has been added as the foreign key, and date assigned has been added to the same relation, because this relation, which is the care center relation, this relation basically is holding the relationship. And if you note that nurse in charge is the new name that has been given to foreign key. Okay, so this thing is not this thing is irrelevant. You can use your own different name. The only thing is that this reference has to be created. This reference has to be there. Secondly, when you will design the physical database design, or when you will implement these relations, the data type of both the primary and foreign key should be the same or compatible. Okay, because you have to match the values in order to fetch the data. So the data types of both these fields, that should be the types, they should be the same, number one. And secondly, this relationship has to be created. This references constraint has to be added using the database management system. Now, how to map the associative entities? We have learned it, okay? Whenever there are associative entities, there would be a third relation in order to accommodate those. And there are again two cases that we have discussed. One case is if there is a chance of repetition of the combination of values in the foreign key, then a third ID would be added. Otherwise, if there is no chance, we can use this combination as a composite primary key. Okay. This is an example where there is where there is a possibility of repetition of values in the foreign keys. Okay, so we have added a new ID to be used as a primary key for this relation, which is representing the associative entity.